Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to work on a unit on organic compounds. And first I want to review just a little bit about what atoms are. You guys have learned this in physical science or maybe in some other science class. Just remember that an element is something that can't be broken down into anything else. And I know you guys have experience with the periodic table of elements. So you don't need to learn much more about that. Just know that it's the simplest substance and you can't break it down into anything else. Okay? There's about 90 that occur naturally. So of course that means the other, 30 or so are actually man-made. And 25 of these living things have to have. So 96% of all living things are the four main elements that you've already had experience with when we did photosynthesis and respiration and the carbon and nitrogen cycle. Those are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. 96% of your mass. So if someone weighed 100 pounds, 96 of those pounds essentially would be carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Okay, and you guys are aware that we abbreviate them with one or two letters, and they don't always necessarily match what we call them. Like lead is Pb, and that comes from the Latin plumum. Some of them make a lot of sense, like carbon is C. Trace elements are elements that you need in a teeny tiny amount, like copper and iron. Iron is an element in your blood that carries oxygen, so if you had no iron, you'd be dead. Okay, so elements put together make compounds, and that's what we're going to get into now. So here's the four main ones: nitrogen, hydrogen, carbon, and then oxygen at a whopping 65%. Okay? All right, so the main difference between organic and inorganic compounds, there's basically two main things, okay? And I want you to keep in mind, we're not talking about like the organic craze in grocery stores and stuff, okay? The biological meaning of organic means that the compound itself contains a carbon, okay? So a carbon has to be one of the main elements. And then the second thing, it either has to be living or come from something that was alive, okay? So as an example, honey is an organic compound. It itself is not alive, but it did come from a living thing, right? A bee. Okay, so then inorganic are the opposites of that. It does not contain carbon, so the capital C will not be one of the elements in the compound itself, and it is non-living. Okay, so that means it, and I don't mean dead, guys, I just mean non-living, like it was never alive. Okay, now there is one exception, like there's always an exception to every rule, and that is carbon dioxide. It is not considered organic, even though it comes from living things, and it does contain a carbon. Okay, but some biologists would argue because it doesn't have the hydrogen in there that it is an inorganic compound. Okay, so just remember that one for later on. It's the only one that breaks the rule. Okay, so just look at a couple of these. We're not going to do all of them. This is magnesium sulfate. See how there's no carbon? So this would be inorganic. This is sucrose or table sugar. It's the kind that we eat. Obviously it comes from sugar cane, which is a living thing. Okay, so this is organic. Water, inorganic. Sulfuric acid, inorganic. This is like a wax, so this is organic because it has that carbon there. Okay? All right, so moving on. Why is carbon so important? It's actually one of the most fundamental elements, especially in living things. It can make four bonds with other elements. It's a very stable element. It can also exist in many forms. This can be a crystal. It can make graphite. It can vary so many ways. So carbon is an essential element for living things. Okay? All right, so we're going to focus on organic compounds today. Remember, they contain carbon, come from a living thing, and they usually contain hydrogen and oxygen also. So guys, if I ask you what macromolecule meant, could you figure that out? Well, you know it's a molecule, and I like to think of macro as being the opposite of micro. A microscope lets you see teeny tiny things, so a macromolecule would be a very large molecule. So the organic compounds we're going to talk about today can be very large, especially when you link one end to end to end. So macromolecules are made of smaller things called monomers. So the best example I can give you is if you take one pearl, that would be like the monomer. And if you make a string of pearls to make a necklace, that would be a macromolecule. Okay, so like a piece to the whole, if you want to think of it that way. Okay? All right, so the first organic compound we need to talk about are carbohydrates. And I know you guys have talked about these in health or, some other class. It literally translates to carbon water. So that means the only elements found in carbohydrates are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. That's it. You're not going to see a nitrogen, a selenium, no other elements will be in it. And what's also unique about a carbohydrate is they're going to be found in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. So let me show you what I mean by that. Here's glucose, which is the natural sugar that's in every living organism. Okay. Notice how there are twice as many hydrogens as there are carbons and oxygens. So if this were a math problem, you would actually have to reduce that down, right? So that would be 1 to 2 to 1. So some scientists just say 2 to 1 in terms of carbon and hydrogen. So you can do it that way if you want to. Okay, so carbohydrates are sugars and starches. Anything you guys can name that's a sugar or a starch. So that would include things that you see in this picture, right? Bread, donuts, cookies. Also things that are starches could be potatoes, rice, cereal a lot of times, pasta, okay? And usually what we need carbs for...
We need all second...
Sorry guys, there's going to be lots of announcements today because they are doing makeup pictures. Okay, so we need carbs for immediate energy, all right? So as an example, if there is someone who is running cross country this afternoon or had a volleyball game this afternoon or whatever, it would be a good idea for them to eat lots of carbohydrates at lunch today, okay? Now, the problem with it being immediate energy is if you don't use it right away, your body's not going to waste it. It's going to store it, and it's going to be stored as fats. Okay, so that's why low-carb diets actually work, because your body has to go to whatever's stored on it for energy instead of getting immediate source of energy. All right, so one of the most important things on this page that you have to remember is that its subunits are monosaccharides, okay? So remember how we said the pearl to the necklace thing? You have to know what the subunits are for carbs, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. All right, so what I need you to memorize is carbs are made of monosaccharides, and that literally means one sugar. Okay? All right, so some more examples of carbohydrates. If you only have one, it's a monosaccharide, glucose, fructose, and galactose. So, this is found in every living thing. Fructose is the sugar that's in fruit. Galactose can be found in milk. Disaccharide, that means there are two sugars together. So, sucrose, that's the sugar that we eat. And polysaccharides, poly means many. These are your starches pretty much. Okay, so regular starches, cellulose, which is the material that is in a plant cell wall, like the stringy stuff that comes off of celery, and then glycogen, which is stored in your liver. You actually have a 3-day supply of glycogen in your liver. Okay? All right, so let's move on to lipids. Lipids are fats, and that's what I need you to remember for that, okay? Their subunits are fatty acids, so I think that would be easy to remember. Think of a fat lip. You're giving somebody a fat lip. This also includes oils and waxes. It has the same elements as carbohydrates, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, but you won't have that nice 1 to 2 to 1 ratio like we did before. You're going to have a lot of carbon, even double the amount of hydrogen, but very few oxygen. So here's an example of a lipid here, 18, 34, and only 2. Remember, if this were a carbohydrate, this number here would be an 18. Okay? So why do we need lipids? They give you their stored energy. Think of like a whale. A whale would have a lot of lipids, right? They make up your cell membranes, if you remember. It's a protective layer around your nerve tissue, and it can also be an insulator, all right? No one can be 0% body fat. I know we've got people who are super lean, but 0% is impossible. Okay? All right, so lipids can be saturated or unsaturated, and I'm sure you've learned about that in health class before, but the main difference is animals, plants, okay, These are much better for you than these because these don't clog your arteries like saturated fats can. And the main difference is think about it at room temperature. If you have olive oil, corn oil, canola oil, vegetable oil, they will all stay liquid at room temperature, whereas saturated fats become solid at room temperature. So like if I fried up some bacon and let the grease sit there, it's going to solidify, okay? And I need you to remember that fats are hydrophobic. We talked about that word when we did the cell membrane. That means they do not dissolve in water, okay? All right, so let's move on to proteins. Proteins are easy to spot because they have an extra element that the other two did not, and that is a nitrogen. So carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. Think of CHON, okay? Its subunits are amino acids. You guys learned that already when we did DNA. They're in meat, muscle tissue, hair. All of your hormones and all of your antibodies are proteins. So proteins can be structural or they can be used in chemical reactions. All right, so here are examples. A lot of people think proteins only come from...
Third period,
I'm sorry, guys. Okay, so a lot of people think proteins only are in meats, but they're also found in a variety of plant foods. So someone who is a vegetarian can still get proteins in. Okay? All right, so structural proteins. Hair, fingernails are made of keratin. You've probably seen shampoos now that say they have keratin in them. Skin has collagen. That's why it can like bounce back. And then it's in a bunch of different things. Okay, these are structural. Other important proteins are enzymes, your insulin, hemoglobin, enzymes we're going to talk about later on. Okay. All right, so then the last one is nucleic acids, and we've actually done this one already when we did DNA and RNA. Remember, they have an extra thing that gives them away too: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and phosphate. So this is like CHOP, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphate. The only two examples are DNA and RNA, and we pass on genetic information with them, okay? So the important thing up here, its subunits are nucleotides, and you guys know that one already. Okay, so just to review, remember guys, DNA and RNA, they have a different sugar. They have one nitrogen base different. DNA is double-stranded, whereas RNA is single-stranded. And a nucleotide is a sugar, a phosphate, and a nitrogen base. Okay? All right, so guys, the most important things to remember here, carbohydrates, its monomer is a monosaccharide. Lipids, their monomers are fatty acids. Proteins, their monomers are amino acids, and then nucleic acids, their monomers are nucleotides. So I'm hoping you'll remember this one for the nucleo part, right, with nucleotides. This one we've done a lot. That's amino acid and fatty acid. I hope you don't get those two mixed up. This is the one that's just going to take a while to memorize. So monosaccharide, just remember it as a sugar, and a carb is a sugar. Okay? All right, if you guys have any questions, make sure you email me or give me a call, okay? And I guess that's it for the day. Have a great day, and if I don't talk to you, you guys have a great Thanksgiving.